Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you how to paint watercolor sweet peas. Sweet peas are one of the birth month flowers for the month of April, and I cannot wait to show you how I painted these beautiful flowers. For this project I am using a piece of Arches 140 pound cold press watercolor paper, my limited palette of colors, cad yellow, magenta, cerulean, indigo, and sap green, and I will also be using a size 10 and a size 4 round brush. Sweet peas look really complicated, but they're so simple and fun to paint. So we're going to start with a watery wash for our first layer. Sweet peas are a lot of different colors. I'm choosing to do a pink purple combo. So my first layer is going to be this very light pink wash, and if you look at reference photos for sweet peas, they can be so many different shapes, but the overall main petal shape I'm going for is kind of a rounded triangle with some rough edges. Sweet peas are on a vine, so these are closer together because they're going to be on one stem and coming off, and I'm trying to vary the different sizes between bigger and smaller petals and flowers. Now, I wanted them to be very light, so I'm tapping my brush on my paper towel and using a damp brush to lift some of the pigment out. But then with another very light wash of magenta, I'm adding a little bit to the edges of the petals just to give some dimension between a dark area on the petal and a light area. Because the sweet peas are so simple, we're looking for ways to create contrast, dimension, and value within each simple petal, within each simple layer. So the trick with this added bit of color is just to make sure that the edge is still wet, because you want a nice soft blend between the light and darker value. That's our first petal layer. We're going to wait for that to completely dry, and now we're going to add a second petal layer to each one of these. This is going to be our purple petal layer. Now I am mixing magenta with indigo, but I'm definitely leaning a lot more magenta to give it a bright pinky purple color, but I want the wash to be very light again because I need it to be transparent. I need to layer this purple over the pink and get that slight transparent look as they layer together. When you look at pictures of sweet peas, they have lots of different petals that are kind of folded together and layered together, and so it's fun to use the properties of watercolor in its transparency to get that layered look and to represent the sweet peas. So we're just finding a way to layer a purple petal over the pink petals that we've already created, and we're trying to mix up how they're opening, how they're squished together, how they're layered together, and what direction they're going in. It does not have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be complicated, we just want a light purple wash over the top of the pink wash. We're also keeping in mind where we want the connection point for the green sepals that connect the purple and the pink petals together, so we do kind of need to keep in mind where the points of our rounded triangle petals are meeting together to attach to the sepal. Once we add this purple layer, our flower part is really done, so we need to find a way to add dimension while this petal is still wet. So I'm adding more blue into my purple to now make this a really purpley blue, and adding that into the purple, hopefully while it's still wet. You'll see that in a lot of my petals, they're not still wet. So what I do is I add the color, rinse my brush, and with a damp brush I can move and blend that dark blue color into the purple. If I can catch it fast enough, I can add it into my petals that are still wet, and it'll give a nice soft blend, but it is not the end of the world if our paper is dry, we get that hard line. Just use a damp brush to help feather that out into the purple petal. I used my size 10 round brush for all of that first part, but now for the stems, I need to switch over to a smaller brush. This is my size 4. I'm starting with sap green, but I want it to be lighter, so I'm also mixing in some cad yellow to get a bright light green. Now, to add dimension into the stems without it looking too choppy, we're going to need to switch from light green, yellow green, dark green, waterier greens as we're painting the stems to give a lot of dimension and interest into the stems without having to go back and add kind of choppy looking layers to such a thin stem. So you'll see me switch back and forth between the yellows, the greens, picking up more water, blending it out, darker greens, and so forth. And if you've seen my other videos, you know I like to add indigo or darker greens at the end as a layer. But when I had done this before with thin stems, like on a sweet pea, it looks very choppy and not very nice. So my solution to that is switching back and forth between colors as I'm creating stems while it's all still wet. So I get nice soft bleeds, but there's dimension and differences of value as I'm switching between colors. So the easiest way to do this is to think of a sweet pea as having a main stem, and there's little stems coming off to attach to the sweet peas, and then there's tiny little leaves called sepals at the base where the pink and purple petals are meeting. Think of the sepals as that top part on a strawberry. Those are also sepals. And when I use a size 4 round brush, I'm really just using the shape of my brush, starting with the tip and dragging out just a little bit for these quick and easy leaves. And you can make some that are smaller or almost non-existent, especially on the tinier flowers, to give some differences in dimension. And then as I come up here to the top, it ends dramatically, but we are going to add some leaves here. So I'm again adding yellow, adding different greens, adding some water so that I can get 2 leaves that are similar in color, but a little bit different in value. And I decide where to place these very thin leaves based on how I want to balance the painting. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, balancing it on the bottom. And I'm just sticking with 2 simple leaves. There's going to be some vining happening around those leaves as well. And I'm really just using the shape of my brush, starting with the tip, dragging and pushing my brush, and then lifting back onto the tip to get these very simple, thin, long leaves. Now, for the vining, which is an important part of sweet peas, you could do one of 2 things. You can switch to a much smaller brush with a very fine tip that does not hold a lot of water or pigment, so you don't get too much blobby paint or too thick of vines. Or, with my size 4 round brush, I really tapped all the water out of it and then barely picked up any paint, and with the tip of my brush at a very high angle, you can see my brush is pointed straight up, I am making these very quick, swirly, curly cues. They don't have to be super connected. They don't have to be perfect. Even the idea of these swirls gives you the impression of the little vines on a sweet pea without them having to be perfectly connected. And we talk about this all the time, is the implied lines. This is a perfect example of how we can create these lines that aren't necessarily all connected, but our brain connects them. We can see the curves, and we can see that it's the vining of sweet peas without having to have them all perfectly connected. Once we have our little curly cues finished, we can dip back into the green and add a few more darker values just to give those a little bit of contrast and interest as well. And that is it. They're so simple. And it's actually my birthday today, and I painted these for my birth month flower. They're one of my favorite flowers. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you so much for being here today while we painted them. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye, guys.